with multiple crises. Again, pandemics, climate crisis, multiple wars. I might go there in a moment here. Economic turndowns. The World Economic Forum is warning that even as we turn our attention to new crises, the old ones persist. That's their words. Now, Gary, they're talking about a coming pandemic that is 20 times more deadly than COVID. I want to introduce this, and then I want to get your comment on it.
World leaders gathering in Davos, Switzerland this week are going to discuss Disease X, a hypothetical virus 20 times deadlier than COVID-19. Addressing a global pandemic is also something that a next U.S. president might face. But what exactly is a Disease X? According to the World Health Organization, Disease X represents the knowledge that a serious international epidemic could be caused by an unknown pathogen. Let's bring in Dr. Amish Adalja. He is a senior scholar at the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security. Thanks so much for being with us. COVID-19 has killed almost 7 million people worldwide. What would a virus 20 times deadlier be like? And is that a possibility that we could see in our lifetime?
It's definitely a possibility, because if you look at COVID-19 and compare it, for example, to the 1918 influenza pandemic, you can see that it is magnitudes less deadly than 1918. And there are strains of viruses that have very high mortality rates that could develop the ability to transmit efficiently from human to human. If we did so poorly with something like COVID-19, you can imagine how poorly we would do with something like a 1918 level event.
Do we know, and maybe this is one of the things they're trying to work out, but where a pathogen like that could originate from as these world leaders think about how to combat such a thing?
Likely these types of pathogens are going to be respiratory viruses, and they may be viruses that are circulating in certain animal species but are not able to transmit yet efficiently between humans. So that could be in bats, like COVID-19, it could be in birds, like bird flu, or it could be some other type of animal species, swine, for example. And it's really about that interface between humans and animals where interactions are occurring that these types of viruses get a foothold. Most of them will die out, but what we worry about is one that can spread efficiently, the way 1918 did.
And so what kinds of preparations might they be talking about? And are there certain roadblocks that we learned about from COVID-19 that just need to be cleared in terms of within individual countries, but then also cooperation across countries? What kinds of topics do you think they're talking about as they discuss Disease X?
The whole idea of Disease X is about being proactive, to look at the myriad types of viruses that can infect humans and kind of narrow in on certain viral families that are most likely to harbor a pandemic pathogen and start working in those families, even if we don't know which member of those families, or even if it's an unknown member of those families, might cause the next pandemic or epidemic. So that means thinking about what do you need to do to make a vaccine? What are the antiviral targets? What type of diagnostic tests do you need to have in place? Should we be doing wastewater monitoring? All of those types of questions are being contemplated in the effort to be proactive.
You're listening to Understanding the Times Radio. I'm Jan Markell. I have on the line from Indiana Gary Kah, who's been monitoring the rush to the One World system for well over 30 years now. He's got wonderful books. Find them at GaryKah.org, spelled K-A-H, GaryKah.org. Gary Kah, your thoughts on what I just played again. World Economic Forum, this was front and center on their agenda a month ago. A disease coming, Disease X, 20 times deadlier than COVID. Again, part of the polycrises going on in our world today that the globalists want to come in and solve.
My first question when I listened to that, and I've heard that numerous times in the last few weeks, that this thing is going to be 20 times deadlier. How do they already know that? Unless there's something already in the offing that they're waiting for the right moment to spring on us. I know that sounds very conspiratorial, but how do they know that this thing's going to be 20 times deadlier? So they're already in advance trying to scare people to death and set the stage so that the World Health Organization will be able to move in and commandeer everyone in a way even more so than they attempted to do last time. There's so much to be said here, I don't even know where to begin. I know that your listeners are probably familiar with the push for a world pandemic treaty.
Yes.
Well, it's going to be the 77th World Health Assembly, and that is the lead part of the World Health Organization. And they're going to be convening at the end of May for the specific purpose of ratifying their global pandemic treaty. I found out just recently this has been in the making for at least 3 years, since March of 2021 that we know about, and maybe even before then. So the purpose of this is to give them special powers the next time a pandemic hits, and they'll be able to move much more quickly, shut things down more quickly, have more authority and power, and I believe ultimately use it in the name of health and prevention of spreading this virus. They will argue in favor of probably a personal QR code. That'll be part of one's digital ID. They'll say money is dirty. We need to do away with cash because it can spread the virus. Same thing with credit cards. So I think that's going to be part of this as well. There's the financial side. Ultimately, people have to understand it's all about control. So being aware of the globalist endgame in all of this, namely the implementation of a global governing system to control us, it seems to me that the powers that be will attempt to launch major crises, plural, on several fronts to facilitate this push into their new world order. Another health crisis alone, I don't believe will be enough this time, especially in the U.S., where people have been awakened to these tactics. I'm wondering, in fact, I wrote in an article recently, how would Americans respond to a triple play? What if a pandemic lockdown, an economic collapse or crisis of some type, and a crippling attack from Russia or Iran's proxies in our country were all to occur at the same time, in addition to all of the proposed draconian impositions related to climate change? And this actually is not an unrealistic scenario given the current trajectory of our nation's policies through the deep state in Washington.
You're absolutely right. Gary, I just want to go back to that conference coming up again in May, the World Health Assembly. That would be May 27th to June 1st, the spring. By the way, Michelle Bachmann was in attendance at the one in 2023. And again, Mr. Biden calls this an accord, so he can wield his powers and his executive orders and doesn't have to answer to Congress if it's called an accord. Again, it's planning for future pandemics and clamping down on them. The 77th World Health Assembly coming up this spring that Gary's referring to. It's in my notes that I wanted to cover because it's one of the upcoming globalist events that are on the agenda for 2024.
Yeah, it would give the UN unprecedented power to enforce health mandates.
Correct.
So we don't want to see that happen, and people have got to be informed about this and put pressure on the Biden administration because they're still going to be in power. And from everything we know and that we've seen, we believe the Biden administration is going to be involved in promoting this because they've been involved throughout the process of drafting this treaty that they're calling an accord. So why would they oppose it if they've been front and center and helping to get it done up to this point?
Let me just open a little different door here, and I made reference to it in my introduction. Get your perspective on it. I've got in front of me an article by John Whitehead. He's written on the website WorldNet Daily, WND.com. According to the FBI, he says, you may be an anti-government extremist if you've, 1, purchased a Bible or other religious materials, if you've used terms like MAGA and Trump, and I suppose this is what in emails, texts, whatever, anything that might be listened to, if you've shopped at Dick's Sporting Goods, Cabela's, or Bass Pro Shops, wonder what's there. Perhaps guns and weaponry? Purchased tickets to travel by bus, cars, or plane, all of the above. And the article goes on to say, in fact, if you selected any of those options in recent years, you're already on a government watch list. That's how broadly the government net is being cast in its pursuit of domestic extremists. We're all fair game now. Easy targets for inclusion on some FBI watch list or another. Again, that's a partial article by John Whitehead on WND.com. Gary, your thoughts on this? This just blows me away because purchasing a Bible will now get us in trouble.
Well, information is power, and if you want to control people, knowing everything about them and where they stand, it makes sense that these organizations who are now run more or less by globalists, unfortunately, including some of our intelligence organizations, they want to know who the conservative Bible-believing Christians are, those who would oppose a new world order that is very anti-Christian. Obviously, we don't want to see a world system come about that would persecute us and Jews and our independence as nations and try to take that away from us. Smart people who are in a battle, they size up their adversaries and want to know everything about them. And that's what they're doing as globalists right now. They want to know who has purchased what from these various stores like Dick's Sporting Goods, who went out and bought a gun in the months that followed January 6th or before even. And a lot of this began years ago, Jan. It's just we're more aware of it now, but this has gradually been coming on for decades. And our FBI used to be a solid organization. They were held in high esteem for being excellent crime fighters, and there are still a lot of good people in that organization, but increasingly, people who are loyal to a globalist anti-U.S. agenda have risen through the ranks up to the top of that organization, and they surround the current president now. So Biden, even if he wanted to take a different path, other forces are leading the way. He's pretty much having to do what they say, or else he'd be out of there, because he's so blackmailable and corrupted. They could get rid of him very quickly if they wanted to, and he knows that. So he's doing their bidding and moving forward with an agenda that a few decades ago he may not have supported, but right now he doesn't have much of a choice. So that's unfortunately where our nation is at. So the last thing that these people want is for Trump to come into power and turn their agenda upside down.
You're listening to Understanding the Times Radio. You can learn much more about Gary's outreach, books, etc. GaryKah.org. When I come back, here's where I want to go for part 2 of my programming. What about this COP28 and forthcoming COP29? Whoever would have thought that the climate agenda would become front and center of the new global spotlight of the One Worlders, focusing on the green agenda? Why? Why is that their obsession? I also want to talk about, for a minute or two anyway, the Summit of the Future coming up in September of 2024. My guess says this may be the most important global gathering to date. What about the World Government Summit coming up in February in Dubai, United Arab Emirates? See, they don't get any more obvious, frank, and blunt than they just call these summits the World Government Summit, because their plan, the One Worlders, is global government. One way or another, by hook or by crook, they are planning on a world with a single ruler. They just don't know it's going to be an ignominious 7 years where everything's going to fall apart, and that would be followed by Jesus' second coming and the establishment of the true New World Order, the millennial reign of Jesus Christ on earth for 1,000 literal years. I believe, my guest believes as well. I'm back in just a minute or two. Don't go away.
We hope you'll stay in